A homeless man ordered the cheapest boxed meal he could find, but when it came time to pay, he was short by just a few cents. He begged the owner to cut him a little slack, but the owner grabbed the food and tossed it straight into the dishwater. He'd rather throw it away than let the man eat it.
Don't come back. Okay. Don't want you here. Go on. All right. Okay, I'm going.
With no other choice, the man survived the night by picking through scraps from a trash can. Luckily, the next day, while he was busking on the street, he ran into his father. Surely that meant he'd have lunch sorted out. But his father looked nervous and hurried away. He was terrified his son might follow him, but it was too late. He'd already been spotted.
Hey, Dad. What are you doing here?
His father stammered and tried to play it off, but his son said the one thing that made it all awkward. He said Christmas is coming up and asked if he could come home for dinner. But before his father could even answer, his stepmother jumped in and shut it down, cold. Her eyes were full of disgust. She couldn't care less about this stepson and his lowly situation. Still, as they were leaving, his father secretly slipped him some cash. It was his small way of easing his guilt. But the man didn't give up. Deep down, he held on to family with everything he had. On Christmas Day, he quietly showed up at his father's house. After a long internal debate, he finally worked up the courage to knock on the door. But the moment it opened, his father's smile froze. All that showed was confusion and unease. When he stepped into the living room, hoping to feel the warmth of home and a sense of belonging, what he got instead was his two half-sisters, coldly telling him to leave.
And Mummy doesn't like you. Mummy says you're a junkie.
His father even made his displeasure clear.
You can't be here. We've got guests coming.
Maybe it was the rejection and the coldness, but the pain was more than he could put into words. He had no choice but to flee from a home where he should have had a place. When he got back to his low-income apartment and stepped into the shower, he heard strange noises coming from the bedroom. He lived alone, so clearly someone had broken in. A chill ran through his body and he jumped up immediately.
Whoever's there, you better leave.
His voice trembled with fear he couldn't hide, and his whole body shook involuntarily. In a panic, he grabbed his shoe as a weapon, but when he threw open the bedroom door, there was no one there. Just as he was about to charge into the kitchen to investigate, the so-called intruder made another sound. It turned out to be an adorable ginger cat. His racing heart finally settled down. Maybe it was James's natural kindness, or maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to go hungry. But he felt a deep sympathy for this little cat that had wandered into his home. He didn't chase it away. Instead, he poured out every last drop of milk he had for it. He couldn't help but stare at the little cat in a daze. But then, sadness crept over him, because he figured this ginger cat had probably just gotten lost, unlike him, who'd been abandoned by his own family. So after the cat had eaten its fill, James opened the window to send it on its way home. But to his surprise, the cat seemed reluctant to leave this little temporary shelter. It turned back and looked at James with these pitiful, pleading eyes. Maybe because he was just so lonely, James decided to let it stay the night. Late that night, in the quiet stillness, James even sang a song for the cat, using music to tell the story of two lonely souls. As the lullaby faded away, the little ginger hopped right up onto his bed and fell peacefully asleep. The next morning, James went door to door with the cat, asking if anyone had lost it. Unfortunately, not a single person came forward to claim the adorable little ginger. With no other option, James set it free where he found it. Deep down, he already had a feeling it was a stray. Part of him wanted to keep it, but reality hit hard. He could barely feed himself. How was he supposed to take care of a cat? But their story was far from over. After saying goodbye to the cat, James headed out to busk on the street, but work that day was a total disaster. He'd barely set up before a security guard chased him off. As night fell and he dragged his exhausted body back home, he found the ginger cat sitting right there at his doorstep. When he got closer, he noticed the cat was hurt. He quickly took off his jacket and gently scooped the little cat up. Since he couldn't find its owner, he turned to the girl next door for help. She cleaned up the wound, which had already started to get infected, and told James to take the cat to a free charity clinic for proper treatment as soon as possible. Fortunately, the cat got treated quickly, and a huge weight lifted off James's chest. But just as he was thanking the doctor and getting ready to leave, something the front desk said stopped him in his tracks. The treatment was free, but the medication wasn't. The cost of the follow-up meds came to £22. For a homeless man, that was a fortune.
It's my food money for the next week.
It's up to you.
But the kinder a person's heart is, the harder it is for them to turn away from suffering. He decided to spend his entire week's budget on getting the little ginger healthy again. But an even bigger problem was waiting. The cat didn't seem grateful at all. It flat out refused to take its medicine. In response to James's good intentions, the little ginger bit his hand. Completely out of ideas, he went back to Betty for help. And wouldn't you know it, the moment the cat was in Betty's hands, it became perfectly calm. She got the medicine down without any fuss. While they were chatting, they gave the cat a proper name, Bob. Thanks to Bob bringing them together, James and Betty started really talking. Betty told James that the neighborhood was full of addicts, and that Bob might have been hurt by one of them. She said the thing she despised most in this world was addicts. When she asked about James's situation, he hesitated, because he was one himself. But not wanting Betty to look down on him, he just said he was a freelance musician without a label. As a street performer and a long struggling addict, he spent his days earning pennies from busking, and his nights spending that hard-earned money chasing a fleeting high. Life for him seemed to have no future, and certainly no happiness. He tried to break free from his chains and kick the habit that kept dragging him down, but after more than a dozen attempts, every single one ended in failure. Sometimes a friend would let him crash in their car for the night and share with him the very thing he knew all too well but could never resist. James would shake his head and say no, but by the next morning, he'd be passed out in the back seat. At this rate, it seemed like James's life might just stall out forever. But luckily, he now had a little cat. The next day, James headed out to busk as usual, but Bob followed him everywhere. Worried he couldn't look after Bob out on the streets, he tried to leave the cat behind in the apartment complex, but the little ginger was impossibly clingy. It secretly followed James and hopped right onto the bus. The passengers were completely charmed by this adorable little stowaway and couldn't help but smile. When Bob didn't see James on the first level, it anxiously scampered up to the second deck to look for him, and sure enough, enough, there was his human. James gave in and set Bob by the window. To keep Bob from running around, a bus attendant brought over a piece of string to use as a makeshift leash. After they got off the bus, with crowds of people everywhere, Bob looked around alertly, his curious eyes taking in this whole new world. James was worried Bob might get scared, so he gently crouched down and let Bob hop up onto his shoulder. And just like that, a unique and magical duo was born. Back when it was just James alone, the people rushing past would barely even notice the scruffy young man sitting on the sidewalk. But now this unusual pair drew everyone's attention. People actually slowed down. They flashed warm smiles at this special team. Passers-by came over asking to take photos with them, and they were happy to open their wallets to show their support and encouragement. And whenever that happened, Bob would nod his little head like a tiny celebrity. By the end of the day, James had made more money in that single afternoon than he usually made in an entire week.
High five. Hey, high five. Do you know what just happened? You are a wonderful little being, aren't you?
As evening fell, they rode the bus home together. James even picked out a brand new leash for Bob. And not only that, they went to the supermarket together so Bob could personally pick out his favorite canned food. From that day on, the people of London were treated to the same sight every day. A man with a ginger cat busking on the street, sharing their own special kind of music. Sometimes the cat would sit sweetly on top of the guitar, as if adding its own touch to the performance. Other times it would sit quietly beside its owner, sharing a peaceful moment together. Their act gradually attracted more and more fans, and James's life slowly started getting back on track. At the same time, James and Betty were spending more time together, and their relationship was quietly warming up. But one day, one of James's old addict friends showed up at his door. He knew James had been doing pretty well lately and asked if James could take him in. James firmly said no, but the friend kept pushing, begging for at least a little money for food. James felt bad, but he knew he couldn't enable that kind of behavior. He told the guy to promise he wouldn't spend the money on anything harmful. But when James came home that night, his worst fear had come true. The friend from earlier was lying motionless on the ground with a used needle scattered beside him. James's heart sank. He immediately recognized this was an overdose. He frantically called out to everyone around him for help. Betty heard his cries and rushed over. She quickly knelt down, assessed the situation, and took some emergency measures to try to save him. But when the ambulance arrived with its sirens blaring, his friend's heart had already stopped. The medics did everything they could, but it was too late. This hit both James and Betty incredibly hard. They had just watched a life slip away right in front of them. In the grief that followed, Betty shared her own secret. The reason she despised addicts so deeply was because her own brother had been one of them. He had been a brilliant painter, but after he got hooked, he completely fell apart. He was even found in the bathtub when he passed, with a needle still in his arm. His friend's passing, combined with Betty's heartbreaking story, hit James like a sledgehammer. He made up his mind once again to get clean and turn his life around, but he didn't dare tell Betty that he was an addict too. So James went to his doctor full of determination and asked to stop his anti-addiction medication completely. He wanted to quit cold turkey through sheer willpower, but the doctor absolutely refused. He explained patiently that recovery doesn't happen overnight. So many people fail at the very last hurdle. He urged James to follow the treatment plan step by step and promised that after reassessment, he'd design a more suitable recovery program for him. But when James went to pick up his medication, Betty happened to see him. The moment she realized the person she trusted was an addict who'd been lying to her, her anger erupted instantly. She turned and walked away without hesitation. James desperately tried to explain, but Betty was done with him. She wanted nothing to do with an addict. And just like that, whatever they had was over. And as if that weren't enough, James's work life hit a wall too. While busking on the street as usual, some arrogant guy walked by with his dog and let it relieve itself right on James's backpack. The dog owner didn't even flinch, just stood there looking smug. His attitude set off the people nearby who'd been listening to James play. Before long, the confrontation went from shoving to an all-out brawl. The police showed up and shut the whole thing down. Even though the security footage proved James was innocent, he was still slapped with a 6-month ban from street performing. With both his relationship and his livelihood gone at the same time, James spiraled for months. Once you give in to your own weakness, you just keep sinking deeper. He collapsed on the streets in full view of everyone, hitting the ground, hitting rock bottom, falling to places lower than the ground itself. His mental state was at its absolute worst. Darkness was closing in on his life again. He stared out the window at the dealers on the street corner. The pressure and the cravings were pushing him toward the edge. He walked straight up to a dealer, but just as the words were about to leave his mouth, James held himself back.
Yes.
By now, the only thing James had left was Bob. The cat had become his one and only lifeline. James knew he could handle going hungry himself, but his cat couldn't. So he pulled himself together and found a job selling newspapers. And once again, Bob's lucky charm effect kicked in. Business was booming. The adorable little ginger was like a magnet, drawing people over to stop and watch. Even if they didn't need a magazine, they were happy to spend a few bucks just to hang out with the cat. Bob played his part perfectly, posing sweetly for photos with every customer. His charm and cuteness won over more and more people every day. Even reporters started taking notice of this special duo. They wanted to write a story about a homeless man and a stray cat saving each other and share it online. As the magazine-selling gig took off, James's life was getting back on track again. In just a few days, he and Bob had become a beloved fixture on the streets of London. But just like clockwork, whenever things started going well for James, trouble would find him. One day, they ran into a mother and her son. The little boy was obsessed with Bob and threw a fit, begging his mother to buy the cat. The woman couldn't say no to her kid, so she started guilt-tripping James. She said his income was unstable and that a stray cat following a homeless man was bound to suffer. She offered a big sum of money to show she was serious, but James wouldn't budge. No amount of money could make him give up Bob, because because Bob wasn't his pet. Bob was his family. The woman flew into a rage and slammed her magazines on the ground. The sudden noise triggered Bob. He panicked, wriggled free from James's shoulder, and bolted. And to make things worse, a dog started chasing after him. By the time James reacted, it was too late. He searched everywhere, combing every corner of the city, but Bob was nowhere to be found. A week went by. James never stopped looking. He couldn't work. He couldn't rest. He was on the verge of a breakdown. His cravings lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting. The doctor told him to keep his emotions in check, or everything he'd worked for would be undone. In his despair, James sat with his guitar but had no desire to play. He stared at Bob's food bowl, feeling a hollowness he couldn't shake. The dealers outside his window seemed to be calling to him. That terrifying thought crept back into his mind. But then he thought of Bob's adorable face and the bond they shared. Once again, James fought off the urge. The temptation nearly swallowed him whole, but thankfully he steadied himself. Life is harder than you can imagine, but maybe the universe was giving him a gift. When he dragged himself home, exhausted and defeated, he suddenly heard a familiar sound.
Bob! Bob! Hey!
The joy of having something lost returned to you, washed over his entire body. He made a silent vow right then and there he would never lose Bob again. He might be homeless, but his cat wouldn't be. To give Bob a better life and to save his own, James decided he was finally ready to go off his medication. He knew the road ahead would be brutal, but for Bob, he was willing to endure anything. The doctor warned him that the first week without medication would bring unimaginable suffering, 100 times worse than the worst flu he'd ever had. But James had made up his mind. Before, when he was just a nameless drifter on the streets, no one ever gave him a second glance. But now, with Bob by his side, people actually talked to him. They called him Bob's dad. They treated him with respect. That recognition and dignity made him even more determined to change. What doesn't end you only makes you stronger. Before going off his medication, James found Betty. He apologized for hiding the truth from her and promised that once he made it through, he'd make it up to her. But there was no response from behind the door. James turned to leave, dejected. Just then, Betty opened the door. She said she could bring him food during that week, but James didn't want to be a burden. First, this was his problem to face. Second, he didn't want Betty to see him in the ugly state that withdrawal would put him in. After stocking up on a week's worth of food, James began the hardest battle of his life, the fight against himself. At first, he tried to distract himself by playing guitar, snapping rubber bands against his wrist. But it wasn't long before the agitation kicked in. He became irritable, restless, unable to sit still. He tied his own hands together and lay on the floor, convulsing as if a million ants were eating him alive from the inside. At his worst, he started hallucinating. But through all of this, Bob never ran away. He just stayed there silently, right by James's side. As time went on, James's senses seemed to shut down. He stood under a freezing cold shower and couldn't feel a thing, but Bob's voice pulled him back from the brink again and again. Gradually, James started to improve. Then one morning he woke up and sunlight was pouring over him. It felt so peaceful and warm. James looked out at the riverside scenery and felt like nothing in the world had changed, and yet somehow everything was brand new. Once he was better, the thing James wanted most was the family connection he'd been missing for so long. The first thing he did was find his father. With excitement, he told him that he'd gotten clean. Then he apologized deeply for all the mistakes he'd made over the years. His father looked at the man standing before him, transformed like a completely new person, and could hardly believe his eyes. With trembling hands, he pulled a photo from his wallet that he'd kept all these years. It was James as a little boy, with a bright smile and innocent eyes. All this time, his father had been quietly missing his son. It was just that his second wife's interference and family complications had kept him from being the father he should have been.
I didn't give up on you. I was ashamed of myself. I didn't know how to be your father. I'm the one who needs to apologize.
The wall between father and son finally came down.
Jack, what are you doing out there?
I'm talking to my son and my grandson.
With a joke and a laugh, years of distance simply melted away. After that, good things started coming one after another. James received an invitation from a publisher. They wanted to write a book about him and Bob. The book was published quickly, and the moment it hit shelves, it became a sensation. On launch day, the line outside the bookstore stretched around the block. Betty was invited too, there to celebrate James's success.
So proud of you.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
His doctor, his father, and fans from his busking days all showed up. They witnessed the miracle that James and Bob had created together. Breaking free from your cocoon takes everything you've got. Turning your life around takes extraordinary courage. During the book signing, another James stopped by to say hello.
Felt like I lived every moment.
Good.
Okay.
Even after finding fame, James never forgot where he came from. He kept performing on the streets, inseparable from Bob, weaving through the avenues and alleyways of London. Together, they worked to raise awareness about treating homeless people with dignity, and they contributed to animal rescue causes along the way. This story is actually pretty simple, but when it's real, it becomes something extraordinary. The James who showed up at the book launch was the real James himself, and the Bob in the movie was actually played by the real Bob. That added a whole other layer of authenticity and emotion to the film. Sometimes the bond between a person and an animal is even more precious than the bonds between people. Bob, full of spirit and soul, had become as close as family to James. That's why when Bob went missing, James completely fell apart. That's why when Bob was scared of big dogs on the street, James would do whatever it took to protect him. That's just how life works. We all face setbacks, and we all meet all kinds of people along the way. Some setbacks will knock you down so hard you think you'll never get up, but there will always be someone or something that pulls you out of the mud. So the message of this film is this: happiness isn't a destination. It's a winding, bumpy road, and Bob was the guide who helped James find a shortcut through it. We just need to keep our hearts beating and open until someone comes along who resonates with us. The people who are on your wavelength are like gifts. They step into your shadow and touch your heart. But sadly, Bob passed away a few years ago after being hit by a car. His life came to an end at the age of 14. James was heartbroken. In the end, he wrote these words: "A light has gone out of my life, and I will spend the rest of my days remembering it."